Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Love Dripping from the Walls. It's just me today, just me hanging out, chatting with y'all. One of the things that has come up in some of our past podcasts is about rules, agreements, and boundaries. So today, what I wanted to talk about is some rules, agreements, and boundaries. And I also, my podcast, I just let people talk and share, and I love, one of the goals is that in people sharing their stories and what they've gone through and what they've learned and their experiences is that other people are validated in their own experiences in their own lives and their own sexualities, and that people are really heard and seen for what they're dealing with, and to create a level of tolerance, acceptance, understanding from all people, not just people who relate to those stories, but people who maybe don't understand or don't have any background in different types of sexualities and relationships. So the podcasts in the past have been pretty long, and I haven't decided if I want to keep them that long or not, or if I should split them up. So I would love to hear feedback. I would love to hear feedback on the length of these podcasts. And with that being said, today's episode is actually going to be a little bit shorter. Going to be about half an hour or so. And like I said, one of the things that's been being brought up in our past podcasts has been this discussion around rules, agreements, and boundaries, and the difference between those things, and when they should be implemented, when they shouldn't be implemented. And, I'm going to talk about them inside of a polyamorous context, but I think that you can take them inside of a monogamous context or whatever relationship setup that you have. I think that you can apply it to those relationships as well. And so the first thing that I want to do is create what I see is the difference between agreements, boundaries, and rules. And I'll start with rules. So for me, rules is a little bit more hard-nosed. It's more like, this is how it's going to be. This is my rule. It's almost like imposing something on someone else, or imposing something on the relationship. And then the other person can either agree to those rules or not agree to those rules, but there's really no discussion around it. It's like, this is it or else. Other people might have different definition of rules, but in what I've seen inside of the poly community and what I've seen on different forums and in researching it online and different places, that seems to be a general consensus, that rules are like something that you place upon the relationship or place upon a person. It's very hard-nosed. And then boundaries is something where it's like, this is where it's more on like for you. So for me, a boundary would be that all of my partners have protected sex, that there's always safe sex, always protected sex practices inside of my relationship. And that's a boundary for me. And so if, someone else doesn't have the same boundary, then I don't have a relationship with you. It's just that simple. Like it's, this is how it is for me. That's how I would like to operate. And if you don't operate that way, thank you for playing, moving on. And then agreements is something, and a boundary is something that you don't impose upon another person. It's just, that's how it is for you and no one else, or not having the expectation that it's for anybody else. And then agreements is that everyone agrees to that. Everyone agrees to that one thing. So for the safe sex practices, like there's an agreement among you and your partner, or there's an agreement among you and your partners that everyone has a safe sex practice, and everyone has talked about it. It's very open. It's like, yes, we all agree that we will all have safe sex. And if anyone is introduced into into my relationship, or there's a new person, or, whatever, that I'm going to make sure that there's safe sex practices in that arena as well. So that would be like an agreement. So that's the very basics of it, right? And I think what I want to delve into is then, inside of these rules, boundaries, and agreements, is what comes up is, where is this agreement or rule coming from? And if it's coming from a place of forwarding the relationship, or if it's coming from a place of fear. So if it's coming from a place of love, abundance, connection, gratitude, faith in one another, whatever that may be, it's like, that's probably an agreement or a boundary or something healthy. If it's coming from a place of fear, insecurity, blame, shame, guilt, pride, then it's probably not healthy. So giving some examples is that if you have a partner, and I've had a couple people who've reached out to me since the podcast has started, and they've said something like, well, I have a relationship where my partner is allowed to sleep with other people, but he or she or them does not allow me to sleep with other people. It's like, okay, in my opinion, that's not healthy. It's not an equal partnership or relationship, and you're imposing a rule on someone that you're not then imposing onto yourself. There's an obvious inequality in that situation. And that's something that's not an agreement, that's not a boundary, that's not something healthy. That's like, hey, you're allowed to do this thing, and I'm allowed to do this thing, and you're not allowed to do that thing. And that's where I think my frustration is that then that's where the breakdown is in people not wanting to be in open relationships or polyamorous relationships, is because then it's like it becomes this unequal thing, and that's not polyamory. Right? So polyamory is also not like chaos. Like, you can sleep with whoever you want and it doesn't even matter. And, it's complete anarchy and like all this stuff, doesn't necessarily mean that either. Like, you can still have conversations about what you want, conversations about agreements and what you're going to do in your relationships, but really being able to look in for yourself and be like, okay, what works for me? And if what works for you, there are relationships that it really works for one person to go and sleep with multiple people and it's not a problem, and the other person doesn't want that. They want to have, relationships, or they don't want to have relationships, and maybe they're less active than their other partner. Just because each partner is not doing the exact same thing does not make it unequal. It's when you impose those types of rules that you can only do this, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get mad at you even if you do the exact same thing that I'm doing. And I find that usually comes from a place of control, fear, insecurity, something unhealthy that hasn't been addressed. And what I want to put out there right away is that this is about you. Like, this is about you as the individual listening to this podcast inside of whatever relationship that you're in right now or want to be in the future. This is all about you, your say, what you get to create. How other people treat you is on you. How you allow, people are going to do whatever they're going to do. Maybe somebody treats you unkindly or unfairly or even abusively, but what you do and how you react to that is on you. And I don't want to sound harsh or like that something is, the proverbial like your fault. but really starting to take ownership of your life, your relationships, how you say that it goes. And there's a lot to unpack in there, because then what comes up is like, well, Elizabeth, if it's all on me, and then then I'm allowed. If it's all on me and I get to create whatever I want, then I get to say what my partners do. No, you don't. You do not get to say what your partners do. You get to say how you get to be treated in the relationship. And if you say something like, hey, I'm only going to be with people who have protected sex, and then your partner goes out and has unprotected sex, then it's on you to say whether or not you want to be with that person, whether or not you want to continue in that relationship, whether or not you want to give them your trust again. Because it really is about you, your self-worth, your self-respect, how you want to be treated, what you ask for. Consider that some of the things in your relationship that you're not happy about, it's because you haven't asked for them, or haven't asked for them in a way that your partner can receive that information. And so I don't want to put it like blame or shame or guilt on anyone at all. What I want to give you is to stand from a place of power, to stand from a place of, this is how I am going to be treated. And if that's not how you're going to treat me, then okay, I'm not going to stick around to be treated any other way than this. So, okay, going back to agreements, rules, boundaries. So and what purpose do they serve? So when you're creating agreements and creating rules for your relationship, asking yourself, okay, what's the purpose of this agreement or, boundary? And I think we've ruled out rules at this point. We've ruled out rules. So we're not imposing anything on anyone. We're creating healthy boundaries, and we're creating healthy agreements inside of our relationship, and then we're communicating that responsibly. Okay? So asking yourself, what are the purpose of these boundaries, and what are the purpose of who is this serving? Okay, so I'll give an example of myself and my partner. So an agreement that we have is that we will have protected sex. That I keep bringing that up, and it's a really big one. If you have multiple people involved in different sexual activities, it's really important to be safe and to keep everyone safe and healthy. And so what is the purpose of that agreement? The purpose of that agreement is that we be safe in our relationship, and that we keep each other healthy, that if she goes out and has sex with other people, that when she comes home, that I don't have to worry about, what happened or what's going to happen to me, or any sort of like STDs or STIs or anything like that. And same with her as well. If I go out and have sex with other people or have sex with my other partners, then she doesn't have to worry about that either, right? So that's the purpose of the agreement, is to have not just us be healthy and safe and have peace of mind, but also to have our partners be healthy and safe and have peace of mind, and have our other partners be healthy and safe and have peace of mind. And you're really creating a community just inside of this one agreement called I will have protected sex, that you're creating a healthy, safe environment for all people involved, not just you and your partner, but all of your partners. And so then the question, who is this serving? This is serving everyone. This agreement is serving everyone inside of this scenario. It's serving me and her. It's serving, her and her other partners. It's serving me and my partners. And it was one thing that was a breakdown inside of relationships that I've had in the past, has been, because it seems very simple. It seems very, very simple to be like, yes, everyone will have protected sex. And that has been a breakdown for me in my relationships in the past, where I haven't been responsible about it in past years, and where I've had to, apologize to partners or make amends and regain trust with people because I had not been responsible for that. And then there's also been where that has not been the case for my other partners' relationships, where I know that inside of those other relationships that they're not honoring the agreement of having protected sex. And so I told my partner, I was like, look, if you don't have this agreement set up with your other partners and you guys aren't having protected sex, then I don't want to be a part of that. That's not something that I'm not going to put myself in danger. I'm not going to put my other partners in danger if, y'all aren't having protected sex. And so it's just really, it's very clear, it's very concise, it's very, black and white. It's like this is either going to happen or it's not going to happen. And this is what I'm going to do, and it's not because it was because I love them. Like it's, it sounds harsh, like, hey, I'm going to stop sleeping with you, or I'm going to stop seeing you or whatever that is, but it's very simple. When you come down to the core, an agreement or a boundary is very, very simple. Take the case that once it starts having drama or once like people are like, it's unfair or like something like that, really just go back and examine like, okay, is this a rule or is this an agreement? Because even if it is an agreement, people's humanity is going to come up. They're going to be like, oh, it's unfair, whatever, blah, 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 blah. But then go back to the questions. Okay, what's the purpose? What is the purpose of this agreement? Who is it serving? And it might change over time. It's like, oh, the original purpose of this agreement was this, but now our relationship looks totally different. So maybe we don't have that agreement anymore. And that's the other thing about agreements as well, is that they can change. Like a rule is like hard, fast, this is the rule. We can't talk about it. This is it. This is how it's going to be. No, nothing else, right? An agreement is also something that can change over time. Maybe right now inside of your relationship, it's just you, one other person, and then maybe you're sleeping with someone else and they're dating someone else. And your agreements might be really simple. Your agreements might be, I agree that we're going to have a date night once a week. Make sure that we see each other. And we agree that we're going to, see our partners this much a week, or like maybe there's like a time allotment, right? Maybe that's like an agreement. But as your relationships grow, it's like, okay, their relationships are growing. They're seeing more people. Okay, now I'm seeing more people. Okay, now you're seeing more people. Now it's like, okay, maybe we should revisit this agreement because now there's more people involved. And so how are we splitting up our time? How are we making this work? Do we want to make it a community? Do we want to have like a family dinner night every single Sunday? I don't know. Like it's your relationship. You get to create whatever you want. And that's the other thing about agreements, is that as they grow and change, they get to be your own creation. So when you're coming from a place of, like I said, when you're coming from a place of love, when you're coming from a place of connection, when you're coming from a place of abundance, gratitude, creativity, all of that, then it becomes this amazing creation. And if you at any point in time are stifled or stuck or constrained or feeling held back or something like that, then it's time to revisit. It's either time to revisit the agreement, or it's time to consider that maybe what you have is not an agreement. It's actually a rule, and you're trying to impose something on someone else that they haven't agreed to or don't want to agree to, or they feel stifled or constrained about. So it really, again, keeping that open communication, like this is how I'm feeling, this is how this is going for me, checking in. Okay, so things to look out for when it's not equal, when it's not equal and it's seen as for the parties of the relationship that it is unequal. Because like I said, most relationships aren't going to look exactly the same on either side. Right? Like my relationship with my girlfriend right now, all of our relationships look differently, but it's not unequal. There's nothing unfair. It's like, this is the agreement that we're in, is that we're exploring and being self-expressed in other relationships outside of our own. So very simple, very, very simple, very clean. Everyone understands. And the other thing about agreements and boundaries, I really want to go back to this like self-respect and self-worth. One of the things that Brandy brought to me when we first started dating was that her boundary was everyone has unprotected sex, or excuse me, everyone has protected sex, not the other way around. Everyone has protected sex, or she's not involved. She's very clear about it. She's very clear. She's very upfront about it, and like that's coming from her own self-respect, her own self-worth. Hey, I'm only going to put myself in situations where everyone is protected and everyone is safe. And if that's not the case, I'm just not going to be involved. That's really all there is to it, you know? And I was like, yeah, and I'm on board. So I'm like, yes, absolutely. I am completely on board. If if other people are involved, then protection is a must. And we're like, great, awesome. But then at that point, it became an agreement. At first, it was her boundary, my boundary. And then as we discovered that we agreed upon that boundary, and so then it became an agreement of our relationship that has a purpose and it's serving us and our partners. And then there's being sure of yourself, because sometimes you are going to date people who, or come across people or be in relationships with people who are not going to respect your boundaries. And one thing that I've come across in my past is that when people don't respect my boundaries, that I have become unsure of myself. Like when because it's not like someone's going to come up to you and you're like, hey, I want you to have protected sex, or hey, if you're going to have sex with someone, then I want to know about it beforehand, or I want to at least know like their name or like how you know them, or, something about them. So I have some sort of context for this interaction or this person. And they're like, and they're like, oh, well, that's unfair. You're placing unrealistic rules on me. You're da 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 da, and you really have to be sure of yourself. You're like, no, this is what works for me. What works for me is that you have protected sex. What works for me is that I know about it beforehand. You're not like telling me a week later, like, oh yeah, by the way, I slept with someone last Friday. It's like, wait, what? Like, when were you planning on telling me that? And, it's very upfront. I want to have honest and open communication. I don't, if I find out that you're hiding something from me, like I'm not okay with the hiding or the not telling. And then whoever you're interested in dating or are dating or have been dating is like, well, that's unfair. That's unrealistic. You can't do that to me. Da 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 da. Like, you really do have to be sure of yourself. Like, no, this is what I want. And you can go back to, okay, what is the purpose? Like, you really do have to re-examine for yourself, okay, what is the purpose of this rule? Am I setting this rule because I'm insecure? Am I setting this rule because of nothing of this that this person has done, but maybe someone has hurt me in the past, and now I'm guarding myself from the past, and that has nothing to do with this person that I'm dating. Okay, maybe I should rethink that rule, or that boundary, or that agreement in myself. And so you have to be the one to decide that for you. But when you decide or come upon the conclusion that it's like, no, this is what's healthy for me, this is what works for me, then being sure of that and not letting people push you around. Or if you see something like, for example, I had someone reach out to me and say, they were explaining to me things that are happening in their relationship where it's borderline abusive. I would say it is abusive, but that's not for me to say whether a relationship is abusive or not. And I define abuse as a pattern of behavior, like a pattern of deceit, or a pattern of dishonoring someone, or a pattern of violence, or a pattern of manipulating. Abuse is a pattern. It's something that happens over and over and over again. And most of the time, the person who is being abusive is justifying their behavior, knowing that what they're doing is not okay and still doing it anyway. And so I would say that this person is in an abusive relationship. And when I'm listening to them speak about their partner and what they're doing, they would really like to stay with this person, which again, it's not for me to say what you do or don't do in relationships. You have to decide for yourself what you are going to do. And you also have to stand in your own self-respect and your own self-worth and what you are going to put up with and what you are not going to put up with, and then being able to stand firm in that. Like, this is how I'm going to be treated. This is how it's going to go down. Or I'm not going to be in that relationship anymore. And I do believe in second chances. I do believe in, when someone's trying to work on themselves, or when someone is really taking the actions to not be that person anymore. So if that is a relationship that you're in, where you do have someone who shows a pattern of manipulation, deceit, lying, violence, if you feel like you are unsafe in a relationship, then it's not about your rules, agreements, or boundaries anymore. It's not about that anymore. It's about how you are going to protect yourself, coming back to really doing that internal work in yourself, reaching out to people, talking with people. I've been in abusive relationships before, and one of the things that has worked for me is that when I start to tell people, this is exactly what happened. I said this, they said this. I said this, they said this. I said this, they did this. I did this, they did this. I did this, like walking through an entire situation and then asking yourself. One of the things that had me leave an abusive relationship is because I realized that if I were listening to myself on the other end, like if I were being my own best friend and I were listening to me say, they said this to me, I said this. They said this to me, I said this. They did this, I did this. And I like walked through the whole scenario, that I actually wouldn't be with that person anymore. That I, like, as my own best friend, I'd be like, that you can't stay. You can't do that to yourself. And as much as you love that person, and as much as you want it to be a different way, and as much as, at one point it was amazing and beautiful and wonderful and perfect, and there are times when they still make you feel that way, you can't be in a relationship where you do that to yourself, where you allow that to happen to you. And again, this is not about victim blaming. This is not like you did something wrong, because I want you to know that if you're in a relationship that is abusive, that you have done nothing wrong. And I'm sure that you have done every single thing in your power to make it not that way anymore. And I am sure that there's a part of you that feels completely powerless and helpless. And I am telling you that you get to decide who gets to treat you what way, that you can stand up for yourself. And I'm here for you. Please reach out. There's domestic violence centers, there's call numbers, there's, so this is when your rules and boundaries go beyond rules and boundaries, when it crosses over into, because there's unhealthy, where it's like people are acting from being insecure, people are acting from not wanting to be controlled, people are acting from, whatever their past is, people are acting from being self-conscious. That's pretty normal, and it can like cross over into unhealthy. But when it crosses over into that pattern of manipulation, control, blaming, abuse, that's when you really have to, it takes something. It takes being bold. It takes being courageous. It takes loving yourself ferociously. It takes stepping outside of everything. It takes possibly putting yourself in danger to have yourself be in a healthy position for yourself again. And so I want you to know that I am your ally, and that please reach out for help. Please tell people around you what's going on, and please reach out to local domestic violence centers, abuse hotlines, get whatever help that you need. And so we went from, there's a whole spectrum. Okay. So we went from agreements and I know this escalated quickly. We went from, what are rules, agreements, and boundaries, discovering what your purpose of your own rules, agreements, and boundaries are, not imposing things on people. So noticing when you're imposing something on someone, or when you're standing from, okay, this is out of my own respect for myself and my own self-worth, like the protected sex thing, right? And then also looking at it from an agreement standpoint, so looking from a relationship standpoint, being able to communicate clearly what the agreements of the relationship are, and knowing that as your relationship changes, that agreements can change. You can revisit it. Just like, okay, does this agreement serve its purpose anymore? Okay, no. Okay, well, let's change the agreement. And then stepping all the way into crossing over into whatever that unhealthy or controlling or abusive rules come to. Like maybe it looks like your partner has imposed consequences on your actions. That could fall into abusive behavior. Or you feel unsafe at any point. Consider that maybe there is an abusive situation at hand. So going all the way, the full gamut of all of those spaces, recognizing what space it is that you're in and being able to act accordingly. And in some situations, it really takes a level of bravery to act accordingly. Like, wow, I'm now in an unhealthy or abusive situation. And it can be really scary. And reaching out for and gaining the help and support that you need. I promise there are people out there that want to help you. I promise there are people out there that want to support you. So just checking in with yourself. Where do you fall on that spectrum? And then acting accordingly from there. Okay, I love you all so much. And thank you for listening. Please reach out to me with any questions, comments, concerns, feedback. I would love to have this discussion. I mean, we could talk about agreements, rules, and boundaries for hours and hours and hours. And this has only been about a half an hour of talking about the full spectrum of what can show up inside of agreements, rules, and boundaries. So please let me know. And I will keep loving you regardless, I promise. And keep loving, keep listening, and we'll talk soon. Thank you for listening to Love Dripping from the Walls. You can follow on Instagram or Facebook at Love Dripping from the Walls. Leave comments and questions, and I may share your thoughts on the podcast. Please rate and review on whatever platform you are listening on. If you want to support Love Dripping from the Walls, log on to the Anchor app and subscribe or give monthly donations. Keep listening and keep loving.